All right, so hi everyone. And so for this video, maybe the first in a series, might do some more of these if it seems popular, if it seems useful, but I'm gonna try to do some videos and accompanying blog posts and primarily around Episerver, right? Doing a little bit of development. So a recent ask came up around managing HTML5 applications within Episerver, which itself is an HTML5 application, of course, but what this customer was looking for was the ability to manage a separately developed HTML5 app. So it's just HTML5 app, no CMS, no managed content, something that came out of a different tool that is just basically an export. So if you could think of like a learning management system, something like along those lines, where you're creating this set of content. This can include JavaScript and CSS. It can include images and video. So creating the separate set of content, being able to export that as a set of files and folders, then how do you deliver that through your Episerver website? This exported information. It's basically the gist of what we're looking at. It's not exactly the requirement, but more or less the same thing. And so I ran this by a couple of colleagues and decided that might be interesting, at least as a thought exercise, might be a good proof of concept to see whether we can use a partial router inside of Episerver to solution this, to create a way of delivering an HTML5 app without the laborious process of, say, recreating a folder structure and uploading the files folder by folder as you go. So what I did here was created an HTML5 app to use as a test. So this is just a little reactive. I definitely don't know React very well and over-architected this, but it's got everything is locally referenced. So it's not pulling anything from your CDN. So if we go into assets, we're going to see Bootstrap CSS. We're going to see React coming in here and a couple of images, right? So all of that will be coming through this HTML5 app, right? So how do we take this separately managed piece of content and deliver that through Episerver? So I'm not going to do live coding, but I am going to walk through the code. I'll show you how this was implemented and a little bit of how that works along the way. So let me increase the size of my IDE here. So the first thing we're going to need for this is the ability to upload a zip file into the media library. Now you can add your metadata here, anything that you would want in order to enhance search or categorization, things like that. Yeah, I'm just keeping it basic, so it's just going to be a very basic media data asset that allows for the uploading of a zip extension. You can manage that how you want. Right, so very basically, we want to be able to upload zip files, right? When you use a partial router, so we'll jump over to that just really quickly, you're going to inherit an interface that accepts basically an input model as the zip media. So this will be the content model, and sends back sort of an output model, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to try to use the zipped HTML5 app and see if we can access the files within that directly. So for the author experience, it's just a matter of uploading a zipped version of that export. They don't have to go through all of that exercise of creating folders and uploads. So can we just upload a zipped asset and then access the application that's within that zip file as if it were just HTML? So that's the goal. All right, so we're going to have as accepting in the iPartial router, we're going to accept zip media, which is just that very basic media type that we're going to be uploading directly into Episerver, and it's going to return some zipped content, right, outside of that. So the zipped content model, if we take a look at that, what that's going to have is just a couple of really basic properties, right? I just need the bytes of the file, so the actual binary data, and basically the MIME type, the file type. So if it's a HTML extension, we want to deliver text/HTML. If it's an image, image/PNG or image/WebP or whatever the right MIME type is for that file. That is so that when this is being delivered to the client, the browser, that client will understand the content that's coming through. If you don't have that and you're delivering HTML or JavaScript without the correct MIME type, it's just going to treat it as text data. It's not going to attempt to execute the HTML or execute the JavaScript. So you are going to run into problems there. So definitely that's all you really have to have. You can do a bit more with that if you'd like to, if there's a need. But again, keeping this just really simple. So two methods inside of this interface for partial router. The first method we're going to cover here is just really basically some partial route data. So you can actually pass in basically the end result. So I could create externally create a zip content model and then pass that in and say, well, what is the URL for this? But I'm not going to worry about that. This is not important for the use case that we have. So I just left it at a very basic level, right? So I didn't really do anything inside of that. But if we scroll on down to the route partial, this is where sort of the magic happens. So this is where it accepts that the basis of the URL is some zip media content, right? So the end user is going to be accessing this as part of the URL. This is like the starting point of the URL. And then segment context is whatever comes after that. So every piece of content inside of the system, each media asset is going to have its own URL. That'll come through with the zip media. The segment context is what comes after that. So if I do media.zip / index.html, that slash and the values that come after that are the remaining segment context. First thing I want to do with this is escape if the data that's coming back is not meaningful to this partial router, meaning that if somebody is just accessing the zip file directly and there's no remaining path, or in this second case where I'm doing a case insensitive compare, if the remaining path, and this is something that just comes through the Episerver UI, but if the remaining path is download, then we just want to let that go, right? We just want to let go through. So we're going to return null in those conditions. And then inside of this, I'm going to get the path omitting the query string, because I don't want to do a lookup inside of the zip file with query string data attached to that. I just want to look in the zip file for the file itself that's being referenced. So we're going to get the path omitting the query string, right? And then this piece is actually important. I'm consuming the entire path. So whatever it is after the zip, I want to use that entire path because that reflects where something lives inside of the zip file, right? So what we need to do next is set the remaining path to an empty string so that this doesn't get into sort of an infinite loop. So if you don't reset the remaining path, what you're basically doing there is saying, taking out the piece that you consume as part of the partial router. So I'm consuming the entire path minus the query string. So I'm going to just set the remaining path to nothing because there's nothing else that needs to happen there. I know this is bad code. I use string.empty, right? Feel free to critique my code in the comments. Right. So, and then we're going to create from that the zipped content model that we ultimately need to return, right? And there are two pieces to this. We're going to have to get the bytes of the file inside of the zip. Right, we're going to have to get and then get the MIME type from the path that's being requested. So we'll hit those in order as we get to them. And then a little bit of just, tiny bit of error checking here or data validation here. If we don't have bytes, if we don't have a MIME type that we can return, if we don't really have meaningful data, we're just going to return the zip file and just let it behave normally. So that's the error condition. You can take that however you like, modify that to include your own error conditions and response. Right, so the first method there is to get the actual bytes of the file. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to pass the content in, and we're going to pass the file path, right? So that's the method that we're passing in here. So it's the content that was passed to the partial router, and then the segment path that we created minus the query string. So we're passing those to get the file bytes, right? So we're going to look at the zip file itself. So this binary data is the zip file. We're going to turn that into a file blob, and then this little method allows you, so this bit of text right here, this bit of code, allows you to just extract that one file. So we're just being opportunistic rather than taking the zip file and decompressing the entire thing into memory, which can be intensive depending on the size of the zip file. What we're doing is we're just reaching into the zip file, grabbing the one file that we need, and we're doing that one at a time. Cache this however you like. This is not optimized. I'm not claiming that it is. But I'm doing with this is just reaching into the zip file to get that one entry that I need. I'm doing that for each file, right? So again, implement your own caching, implement your own performance enhancements here, right? Make sure that the application you're writing is performing well. So we're going to get the entry. We're going to have a location where we're storing those file bytes. This is what we're going to be returning at the end of the method. So if the document equals null, so if we reach into this document, looking along a specific path, right, or a specific path, if we don't get anything out of that, if we get a null back from that method, we just want to return null. We just want to, basically cancel out. And then inside of that, given that we have a document being returned, so we reached into the zip, we've got data coming back through, we're going to open that using a stream and basically use a memory stream to read all of the bytes of that file. So we set a buffer, a read value here. And then while we're able to read that into the buffer, then we're going to just be writing that data from the zipped file into the memory stream temporarily, and then assigning all of the bytes that got written to the memory stream to that file bytes variable, and ultimately returning those bytes. So it's just grabbing the raw bytes. So we reach into the zip, we grab the file, we read the raw byte data, and just return that as an array to include into that zipped content model above. The MIME type, very easy, little method here. I just assume that there's an extension there. If there's not an extension, I don't really do the right error checking here. Again, proof of concept code. You write good code, right? Write good code. Don't do what I'm doing because this is a POC. It's basically throwaway code. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the file name, which is the last piece of the segment. So you might have path, like assets / JavaScript / yada yada yada, right? So you're going to get the last piece of the segment, which is going to be the file name being requested. And then there's a built-in method in .NET for getting the MIME mapping. So you can use MIME mapping, get MIME mapping on the file name itself. That'll return the file type. We just want to, just pass that right back. So what we end up with is a model where we've got the raw bytes of the file and the MIME type, like the string that says image / JPEG, image / GIF, right? And we're just going to return that model. We're going to do a little error checking, make sure that we have something. If we don't, we're just going to return null. Again, use your own data validation, use your own erroring, feedback into the client, whatever you need to do there. And we'll just return that model. Right, so that's the partial router. That's the way that this is going to work. That's going to be the flow. Where that goes from here is into the controller. That's a pretty basic controller that inherits from iRender template. So this is the Episerver iRender template interface that tells Episerver that this is a controller that's going to handle content of this type. So this is the zipped content model. This is not iContent. You do have to make these virtual in your content model. That these are not Episerver managed content, so don't have this inherit from iContent or something like that. But the controller is just going to accept that content. We're going to get that from the routed data. Right, so we're going to go into the request context, get routed data of that type. So we're going to pull that directly into our index action. Now, I had, in my implementation, I had a lot of trouble with images. Everything else worked fine in the testing that I did, but images for some reason required special handling. And I don't know why, but this, I couldn't find one solution that just worked for everything. So I've got a condition here that if it's an image, and this is not perfect, if you have a better solution, please leave it in the comments. More than happy to add a revision to this code. But if you have, if I have an image here, then I had to go through a different process than I did for every other file. So what we have to do is clear the content. So response.clear content, set the content type directly into the response, write the byte array directly into the output stream, and then end the response here. Right, so this is actually an important part of the process. If I didn't end the response here, something was happening further down the line that modified the response, invalidated the format of the image, so it wasn't a valid image anymore and couldn't be interpreted as such. So we're going to just response.end here, and we don't need to return anything. It was already ended the response. So just return null, just to get out of the method. Anything that wasn't an image, at least in my testing, it was fine if I just did a return file, right, and return the file bytes and the file type. This was sufficient for me to read and return any of the files that I included in my testing. But you do have to, once you write your partial router and all of the other pieces, you have to make sure that your partial router is being initialized, that we are adding this partial router to the route table and the routes that come from that. What I did was I created inside of the foundation site, I created a special folder that would house these HTML5 apps. Right, so if you look at the examples in the Episerver documentation, they are creating this folder on the fly, which is fine if you want to do that. For my sample here, I didn't want to go through automatic generation of a folder. Certainly can look for one by convention, by name, create that if you need to. I just kept it simple. All I cared about was just initializing the partial router. But the reason I created a special folder here was that so zip files anywhere else would just be ignored. You wouldn't be able to do that dive into the zip file if it's outside of this folder. So I wanted to make sure that there was an exclusive location where I'm hosting these modules or these exports, these HTML5 applications. Right, so go back to Visual Studio. We're setting it up to use the zip media partial router at this root, which is the folder that I created. So it'll only do the partial routing on the zip files uploaded into that location or some child of. And then we register that partial router into the route table. That's really all there is to it. It's very basic initialization module. So let's see the results then. Let's go into Episerver. I have nothing in the HTML5 apps folder. This is where I, as a magician, would show you I have nothing up my sleeves, right? This is the HTML5 app that we're going to work with. I've already zipped it. So we have the zip version of this HTML5 app that I showed at the beginning of the video. Just upload that. And then when we go to it, right, we get this download link in the action menu. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that link address. We'll open a new tab. And when we paste that in, I know from looking at the folder that this is the root of the application is index.html. So if we do that, what it's actually doing is, well, we said it's reaching into the zip file. It's grabbing the requested file, the HTML, and pulling that back in. So you can see the JavaScript is running inside of that. And I have a couple of buttons here, load up either Gandalf, or I have no idea what I'm doing, because these are basically the two states of any developer. And I am either, I'm quite binary, I'm either the wizard of the day or I am completely lost in my own code. So this is an HTML5 app with external resources, with local resources. So if we go into that, we see the images are right here, right? It's loading the JavaScript from this folder, the CSS from this folder. So it's actually reaching into nested folders to grab resources by relative path that are coming through the index.html, right? So all of those, the only exception is I had a JSX transformer in there just for the React stuff to work correctly. My React code is abysmal. I know it's bad. That's fine. I'm learning. But let me know what you think of this. If you think it's a pretty neat idea and something you might be able to use, then great. Partial routers, really easy to implement. One of my favorite tools inside of Episerver. I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I just love the idea of it. And it's so easy to implement. Because this is, I've kind of spaced things out a bit, but there's less than 200 lines of code spread across 5 class files. A couple of which are just ridiculously easy little models, right? There's virtually nothing to them. But just for less than a couple hundred lines of code, you can have a partial router that is, injecting custom business logic around URLs and extensions to those URLs. I think it's just fascinating and huge value of using Episerver, that you can do things like this, and it's just baked into the platform to enable you to do so. Let me know if you have any feedback. Link to the blog post about this in the description below. Yeah, feedback in the comments. Happy to hear what you love, what you hate, or what other applications you might see for this. So yeah, just let me know, and thanks for watching.